Hi, and welcome back to this Let's Build ASP.NET MVC tutorial series. This is the final whistle tutorial part 3. I just need to remind myself where we are, to be honest. If I go back to GitHub, so in this one we're going to be entering teams and match results information. Basically we're going to be working on the back end and building a nice interface so that we can enter teams and the actual matches. Now this is going to... I'm not going to say you're going to need to know about C#, but you're going to have a general idea of what it is that we're doing here, because I'm going to be using some code that might not be sort of immediately clear what it does, but I'll do my best to explain what it is, and hopefully I'll do it in a way that's easy enough for you to understand. But some of the keywords and things like that you might not, you might think, whoa, what's that? But hopefully I'll explain what's going on. Just for speed purposes really, because I can see this taking well over an hour to do, to be honest. So let's get cracking. However, having said that, the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of backtrack back into part 2. You'll notice that we set up this this model here, and I just want to make a couple of corrections to it because I think I can teach it a little bit better, and at least one part of it I can teach you a separate way of doing it to the next part, so you'll actually get two ways of learning how to deal with the database for the price of one. So what I want you to do is I want you to open up the core DBML, which is our view into what's happening in the database. And I want you to click on this arrow here and press the delete key. Get rid of it and the one underneath it as well. So the only link is between the match and the match reports. And what I want you to do then is I want you to click on the match, and I want you to click on home team, and I want you to go down in the properties window down here and change the name to home team ID, uppercase I, lowercase d. Do the same with the source. Put ID on the end. Then click on away team and do exactly the same thing. Change the name to away team ID, and also the source of it to ID as well. Click on save, or Control and S. Do the same with the match. Let's click on match, and where it says match in the list of things, we want to change the name of that in the properties window to match ID, and the source to match ID as well. Now this is just purely for clarity purposes, because when I'm doing the code it would have gotten a little bit sort of mixed up and it might have been a little bit tougher to understand. But we've changed our model within the application. Now we need to just do the quick update to the database. So click on Server Explorer, click on matches, right click and hit Open Table Definition, and do the same what you've just done there. Just click on home team, put ID on the end, away team ID, then hit update, then update database, update complete at the bottom there. We'll do the same for the match reports, which is what we've just changed. Refresh that, and we need to open the table definition and change match to become match ID. Now it is important that you kept the case sensitivity there exactly the same, otherwise you will have problems. But let's just hit update database, and now our database matches the actual model in the application, so we're all good to go. So thank you for doing that. Apologies, but I thought it was a better way to teach it, and you'll see why hopefully as we go on. So the next thing that I want to run through is if you click on the Solution Explorer, let's just build this application. So we've got a running copy as we're going. So build started. When it's ready, I'm going to flick to the window. So let's go to the template. So you can see here we're in the admin area, and the top has changed to red. If I click on back to website, when my machine wakes up, if it wakes up, so now we're on the front end, and you can see the navigation is in yellow. Now how it does that is, we've actually got what's called, well, they used to be called master pages in the old ASP.NET, but now they're called layout files, and they're exactly the same thing, or they do the same job anyway. Basically, the layout of the website is this here. This is like it's kind of the template, and the actual page that we are on gets rendered here in this white area. So if you think about the layout files themselves, they're kind of like a wrapper for the actual page that gets displayed, and it basically means that you can have the same template throughout every page on your website, and if you ever want to make a change, you don't have to change every single page on the website, you just change this template and all of the pages will get updated at the same time. But it also means that you can have one for the front end, you can have one for the admin, and the way you do that, if I just click on admin there, oh, it's running slowly, you can see the admin has a different navigation. Aside from the colour, it has different navigation options to the front one. And the way we do that is, if you go to the Solution Explorer, you can see I've got two files here that aren't within a folder. They're in the Views folder, but they're not within a subfolder, so they don't actually correspond to a controller. And one we've got is Layout. And if I open that up, you can see it's got the style sheets, it's got a reference to jQuery, which is JavaScript, which we're not actually using at the moment, so I could probably take that out. It's also got the fonts that we need, the web fonts, but you can see it's also got the logo and stuff at the top. It says Final Whistle, Football News, Blow by Blow. Now if we flick back to the actual template, it says Football News, Blow by Blow. And then underneath that, it's got the navigation, which has the links, which are then displayed. So we've got Latest Match, which is this page that we're on now. All match reports, all teams, league tables, etc, etc. Whoops, put that right. So you can see it corresponds to what we're seeing here. But within this file, we don't actually have any of this. We don't have home team versus away team, etc. We don't have all this text down here. Instead, what we have is this section here called render body. And that render body is actually called based on the current web address that we're rendering. And didn't I say that in the in Visual Studio, when we access a URL, it references a controller and then a controller method. So www.mywebsite.com would reference home index, and whatever is in home index gets chucked out into this section of the template using that render body thing within the layout. Now the same thing goes for the admin section, but as you can see, we've still got the same CSS and stuff like that, but this one has actually got a class of admin at the top, and that basically causes the different CSS to kick in, so that we get a red navigation bar. But the actual text within the navigation bar is controlled from within this layout file, and you can see we've got different links. We've got dashboard, team management, matches, etc. And in the other one, they're actually different. Let's see if I can get it lined up slightly. So you can see the change. That's the front end one, latest match, all match reports. The admin one has the actual links, and in there it has links to controllers that actually don't exist yet, but we're going to create them at the moment. But again, the render body is actually just that is just the results of the file within the controller, within the view section, that gets displayed based on the current web address that we're on. Is that clear? So basically, in order to determine which page, which layout a page uses, if we go to home index, you can see it's actually got its layout set to views underscore layout. Now if I change that to admin, we'll still be on the same URL, but if I click refresh, we will now get the admin template, so it'll be red and stuff at the top. I just refresh the page. The only thing that's changed has been the reference to the different template. So you can see it's like loaded in the different template, but we've still got the actual content chucked in. You see? So that's kind of just an illustration of how these different templates work. And basically throughout these tutorials, we will be referencing either the front end template, layout.cshtml, or the back end template, which is admin.cshtml. And depending on obviously which page we're working on, that's the one that we'll actually put at the top to determine where it displays in the website. Now it's worth bearing in mind that there's not going to be any authentication or anything on the admin area at the moment. That's something for way further down the line. It's too much to get into for this tutorial. But normally, if you had an admin area of your website, it would be behind a password. You wouldn't want anybody to just be able to log on and change the content of the website. But that's exactly what we're going to do here, just for kind of ease of illustration. So if we go back, I've changed that back to use the front end layout, and it should be nice and yellow again. La la la. So we click on admin, which takes us to /admin, which then corresponds to this controller here, the admin controller, the index method, and in here we have an admin index, and you can see that is referencing the admin template. and it says admin area, please use this section of the website to add new information and edit existing stuff. That's exactly what we're seeing there. If I'm to change the content on that page to put a smiley face in, I just add that, click save, click refresh, and we should get a nice smiley face down there. So you can see we're editing this page, the template's staying exactly the same. There it is. But what we need to do now is we need to work on our teams. The whole point of this tutorial was to show you how to add new teams into the database. But first of all, we need to actually make it so that we can flick to the teams page. Now if I click that right at the moment, that's going to bomb out because we've not created the teams. It's trying to get the / teams. That doesn't exist, so it can't. So I'll hit back. So what we need to do is we need to create, because I'm linking to / teams, we need to create a teams controller. So if we go to Visual Studio, I have to stop it from running because you can't make changes to code while the application's in use. Right click on controllers, add controller, and because we called it, we want to create an empty controller, add, let's call it teams controller. And again we've got the first method is called index. So if we go to / teams, it will, if I press go, it will attempt to go to that URL now because it exists. However, it is going to bomb out because we haven't created a view for the layout template to pull in. So if I click on Teams, we'll get a different error this time. It'll be a big yellow error saying I've searched for this template file somewhere and I just can't find it. Let it kick in. There you go. The view index was not found. Blah de blah de blah. This is where it's searched. So what I need to do is I need to go down to my views, and you'll see that actually I need to stop this from running. You'll see that in the views folder we now have a folder called teams, which is automatically being created for us when we created the teams controller. So what I need to do is I need to right click on there, click on add, click on view, and I'll call it index because remember the first thing is called index in the controller, and I want to use the admin layout page. If I want to use a different one, I can click on this button and I can select either the admin one or the front end one. We're going to use the admin one because we're working on the admin area. Click on add and it creates a page for us with the stuff at the top, and I can change this to an H1 and say my teams. Click on save. I'll run the application, debug. If you want to, you can press F5 to just start this from doing. That's what I'm going to do from now on. So if you think, how's he got that running? I've just pressed F5 and it automatically does the build. So if I flick back the application, we didn't have an index before, but we have created it now. If I refresh the page, we're on the URL of / teams, and we will have a page that says my teams using the admin template. Excuse me, I got a dry mouth. So there we are, we've got my teams, and what we're going to do on this page, if you remember in the previous tutorial we actually created the database tables, and in our teams table we put some decent teams and some questionable teams in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this information out and we're going to display it in a list on this page. So basically when you click on team management you get a full list of all the teams on the page. Now here's where we get into the nitty gritty and the code of how to do that. What we need is we don't want a direct connection to the database from our controller. We want a little piece of what I like to call it. It's not so much middleware, but it's a layer. It's a layer where it talks to the database and spits information back when someone asks it for, or when a method asks it for information. So if you imagine on this index page of the Teams controller, it'll say, please give me a list of all of the teams from the database. So it'll send the request saying, please give me this information, and this access layer will go, okay, I'll hit the database, get the information back, and send you back what you need. It separates the data from the content, and it basically means that I can use that code for getting all of the teams from many different methods anywhere in the website, and I only have it written in one place. The only thing I need to do is I need to create a reference to this data layer from wherever I'm asking for the information from. Don't worry if you don't understand, I'm going to show it now. So in the database we've got Tottenham Hotspur, Man United, Newcastle United and Sunderland. We need to pull them onto this page here. So first things first, let's close everything down. What we need to do is we need to create our data access layer, and all that is going to be is going to be what's called a class in C#. It's basically a bunch of code with different methods on that can be called depending on what it is that you actually want to do. So to do that, I need to right click on models, add class, and I'm going to call this Teams repository. You could call it Teams library or whatever it is you want. Click on add, and I will have a blank canvas for writing some code. Now what I need to do is I need to tell this repository all about my database, and the way to do that is just, if you remember when we created this, we called it core. This is our core context, and its actual name underneath is called a data context, and because it's called core, it's actually called core data context in the application. So if I create a new object of that, core data context, and I give it a name of, let's call it db equals new core data context, that basically means anytime I want to write a method within this repository that needs to access the database, I don't need to type in all this. I just can say like db dot, actually I can't demo it there, but I can basically use this db variable as a pointer to what this actually is. This db represents this connection to the database. So what I need to do is I need to actually create a method that will allow me to get all of the teams out of the database and put them in a list so that I can send them back to wherever in the code is asking for it. So I need to create a quick method in here called give me my teams. So public list of type team, because we're getting teams back, and I want what should we call it? Get all teams. And all this is going to do is just return a list of type team to whoever asks for it. And the way to do that is just return db.teams.toList. Dead simple, nothing else to it. So anytime this method is called, it's going to send back a list of all of the teams in the database as a list. Dead simple. So now if I go back to my my teams controller, remember I've called this the teams repository. So if I say in this index method, remember I said we had to do some processing in here in order to spit it out to the database. I can say teams repository. I can create a new team. Actually, no, I've just screwed myself up there. I need to actually tell the controller that that exists. So the way to do that is I need to say using final whistle, which is the name of the project, dot models. You see that? And that tells the controller it can actually access the stuff in this folder. So now if I start typing teams repository, there it is, and I'll call it teams rep equals new teams repository. What I've done there is I've actually created a new instance of this, and I've called it teams rep. So now what I can do is I can say var my teams equals teams rep dot, and then there's our method that we just created, get all teams. So now hopefully you can see what's going on there. I've actually created a reference to the teams repository, and then I'm trying to say I want something called my teams, which is going to be a list of all my teams, and the way to populate that is to say, right, use my repository and call this method, and that method will pull the information out of the database. Remember, it's going to call this, it's going to return all of the teams into that variable here. And then what I can say is if my teams.count is greater than 0, so it contains some, I can actually set something called a view data, my teams, or whatever I want to call it, equals my teams. So what I'm doing is if my teams gets populated, if there are any teams coming back from the database, this checks to see how many there are. If it's more than 0, then I want to store my teams in this piece of code here, and this piece of code here gets chucked through into the view. So if I go back to the view here in teams, this is where I want to operate on it. Again, what I need to do is I need to say using final whistle.models just so it knows about the different types of data. What I can do is I can say if that chunk of code is not null, show some data. In fact, let's change that. There will be some data shown. If that does not exist, I'll say there are no teams to display from the database. So let's just run through that again. We're calling this URL, which is /teams, which corresponds to the index method. We're creating a new link to our data access layer, which is a teams repository. We're then calling this method in the repository, which returns a list of all of our teams. We're storing the teams in this variable here. We're checking to see if there are any teams within it, and if there are, we're creating a new think of it as a tag that contains all of the information. If there are teams in our list, we're going to generate that tag and we're going to chuck that into the view, and then when we get into the view, we're going to check to see if that exists. Because remember, in here, if there weren't any, if there were 0, then we would skip over this piece of code, so that thing there would never get created. So what it's saying is, if that is empty, if it's not empty, then we'll show the results. But if it is empty, that's the else case, then there's just obviously no teams to display from the database. However, we know that there are teams in the database, so in order to get them to display, we now need to write a little bit extra code in here to loop through the contents of that tag that we've kind of sent across in the view data. And I am aware that it is getting a little bit complicated, but unfortunately that's how ASP.NET MVC works. So it's kind of imperative that you learn these phrases and stuff to be able to display information on the pages. I am trying to explain it as easily as possible, and I hope you're following along, but just bear with me, and hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer as well. So in this section of the code, we've already established that this is not empty, so we have information, so there are some teams. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each individual one. So we're going to create a table, let's create a new row, let's create a header, and we'll call it team name. And in here we'll say for each team, and let's call each team just T, in IEnumerable of type team, we'll write out a new row. I'm going to write this out and then I'm going to explain what it is I'm doing. So we've established that there are teams within the view data, within that. So we're writing out a table, and then we're going to loop through all of the items within the view data. And the way to do that is to say for each team in our view data, which is an IEnumerable object which contains teams, and IEnumerable means that basically you can just go through it. So for each one of those, we're actually going to write out a new HTML row, and we're going to write out a new cell within the table, and we are going to write the name of the team that we're currently looping through. So that should be straightforward. So if I click start debugging and the application starts to run, I should be able to refresh this page and we should get a table with all of our team names in it. So hopefully that's ready now, and we should see all of the teams in there. There we go. So we've got our team name at the top and then a list of all of the teams. Now, this is not ideal because if we had 30 or 40 teams, you would expect them to be kind of in alphabetical order, but at the moment it's coming through 1, 2, 3, 4 in our database. So what we need to do is we need to, instead of it doing that, we need to order it alphabetically, really. And instead of having to sort of change all of the records in the table around, we can just basically add a tiny little piece of code to our controller to dictate how we want that code to appear. So if we go to the team controller in the index method, where we assign our teams into that bit that gets chucked into the view, we just say, right, I want that bit there to become my teams dot order by and then we do what's called a lambda expression, k.team_name. So that's basically instructing that to become a list which is ordered by the team name of each item in the list. So that's all there is to it, and because it's dynamically generated, if I press F5 to just run it all again, that's all we've changed. And instead of having Tottenham at the top, Spurs will actually be at the bottom, because obviously it'll be alphabetically listed, so it should go Manchester, Newcastle, Sunderland, Tottenham. And we haven't actually changed any of the HTML on the page. We've just basically we've changed the controller where we were actually getting the information. So let's wait for that to kick in. So Spurs were top. Unfortunately, Spurs will now be bottom of the league. Hopefully, it's not an omen for this season, but I guess we'll see. You can see my internet's having some fun. There we go. So it's ordered alphabetically now. So hopefully, if we had a big list, we would actually be able to go through and make sense of what was it, and be able to find the team that we wanted to actually work on sooner rather than later. So that's just an example of making the database work for us. We've got the data out, but we want it in a certain format. So we just write a little command to say, yes, I want that information, but I want it in this order instead of the order you want to give it to me by default. So there we are. We have got this front page. The next stage is to actually create a new team. And I'm just going to pause this video here because I need to go and get another drink. But I will be back with you in a second. Hopefully you're following along. And let's just add a cut here, and I will be back in a second. Thanks for watching. Cheers.